Welcome to Sting City. Hey everybody, and welcome back. Today we're going to be melting down some wax. I have a bag of wax here. This is actually the wax cappings that I collected when we were harvesting the honey. So if you recall, each frame I had to cut or scrape the wax capping off the honeycomb to expose the honey. And I collected those wax cappings in a bin. Once I was done extracting the honey, I got as much honey out of those cappings as I could, and then I actually was able to kind of wash them out and strain them out, and was left with these nice white flakes of wax. It almost looks like oatmeal, kind of, and you'll notice that it's nice and white. This is because this is fresh wax. It wasn't in the hive too long. I also have some honeycomb that I've collected and kind of scraped out of the hives during some hive inspections when they had put honeycomb where I didn't really want it. And we're going to add that in with this too when we start melting it down. And you'll quickly notice the difference in color between that and this nice fresh white wax here. The older honeycomb is a yellower color, and the color that you would probably think of when you think of honeycomb or beeswax. And basically, it turns that color as it's in the hive. The bees are walking over it and using it, and that wax collects residue, propolis, and pollen, and anything that might be on the bees' bodies and feet as they're walking over it. So it absorbs that, and over time, it turns a darker and darker um, color of yellow, and eventually it'll turn black. The bees actually have 8 glands on their body where they excrete this wax substance, and it forms a flake kind of on their chest. Once that flake is formed, they can peel it off and manipulate it and form it into the structures that make up a hive, namely the honeycomb and then the capping for the brood when the pupae are developing, or capping the um, honey. Now, your first thought may be that that's weird. The bees can excrete wax out of their bodies, but the reality is we do too. Think about earwax. So, something we have in common with honeybees. So, with that interesting knowledge, let's start melting this down. Okay, so we're going to melt this wax down, and to do that, I am going to use this lovely little crock pot here. We'll put a little water in there, and we'll put the wax in, and as the wax melts, it actually floats on the water, and will form a nice little puck, kind of like, it'll form a nice little kind of puck like this once it cools. But what we also want to do is kind of strain out any of the stuff we don't want in the wax. So I'm going to put all the wax and kind of tie it up inside this little cheesecloth bag, and then set the cheesecloth bag in the crock pot. And as it melts, it'll kind of filter through the cheesecloth, and then we'll let it cool in there, and we'll have a nice little chunk of beeswax. So here we go. Okay, so to start here, we're going to take this cheesecloth. See if I need to cut this down, which it looks like I do. I can cut this in half. Nothing special with this cheesecloth. Cheapest I could find. So then we're going to take this wax here. I'm going to just dump it on the cheesecloth, like so. And I actually have some other kind of burr, honeycomb, random stuff that I scraped out of the hive during some of the hive inspections. So we're going to put that in here too. Doesn't have to be perfect, but the better you can get it tied up, the better it's going to keep the debris from getting into the wax. So We're gonna have something like this. Take some string here. An extra knot. There you go. A little bit of a little cheesecloth sack of beeswax. So like I mentioned, we're going to melt this actually in some water. And what that does, again, the wax will float on top of the layer of water in the crock pot. And it helps immensely once it cools off to get the wax out. Otherwise, it would be all stuck to the bottom and everything. So we're going to dump some water in here. Really doesn't matter how much. Looks about good. We're going to shove our sack of wax in here. Stick our lid on it. Plug it in. And let it go. Well, this will probably take, I don't know, it's been a while, but it'll probably take a couple hours for that to get all fully melted. And then what I found is once it's fully melted, we'll take a look at it, but we'll pull the cheesecloth out and kind of, it's hot, but you kind of strain as much wax out of as you can, and then let it cool off. And if you let it cool off all the way right in the crock pot, that little puck of beeswax that's floating in there shrinks a little bit, so it pulls away from the walls and pops right out. All right, we are back. It's been just about 2 hours. I like to wear some rubber gloves when I'm doing this. And fair warning, if you get this liquid wax on any of your clothes, you're pretty much stuck with it. So be aware. Turn the crock pot off. And you can see it's kind of bubbling in there. So what we're going to do here is lift our little bag out. You can see a bunch of black stuff in there that it is kind of filtered out for us. Kind of let it cool a little bit because you want to squeeze this out and get as much wax out of the bottom as you can. But it's hot. See it running out there. Okay, so looks good. I gotta discard this, and what I like to do here is actually sit it in my glove. Pull my glove off, right over it. Voila, we got it trapped in there. So we're not gonna get a big waxy mess where we don't want it. That looks like. So that's a bunch of hot wax floating on that water that we put in there. So I've turned the crock pot off, and we're going to let that sit and cool. And then we will check back in again. Okay, so we are back here, and our pot has cooled off. I actually let it cool overnight, as it turned out. So not a speedy method here, but let's see what our wax looks like. Okay, so you can see our wax is floating on the water here. So all we're going to do is push this one edge down, maybe, pop it out. Okay, so here it is. Here's our beeswax that we've melted and filtered, and it's in a nice shape now that we can store. We have strained out all the impurities and stuff that we don't want in there. If you're going to do something like making lip balm or something out of this, you definitely want to filter it a little bit further. But for other uses, like melting it down to recoat the plastic foundation in the frames, this is perfectly fine. Another fun use of this is to melt down and make some candles. You can also use it as a wood finish, where you apply it to your wood and it creates a nice wax finish on it. So lots of uses for this, and you can see the process. Again, this wasn't a really fast process, and I'm sure there are faster ones, but for the quantity that I have, it works really well. All right, well, that wraps up the wax rendering process, or at least a wax rendering process. As with everything, I'm sure there's about 100 ways to do it. Some undoubtedly better and quicker, but that seems to work for me. As I was preparing this, I started to wonder about the origin of the mind your own beeswax statement. And one story that came up quite a bit in my research, I mean, it's on Google, it's got to be true, right? Is that during the 18th century, smallpox epidemic, people would actually use beeswax on their face to cover up the scars from the smallpox. And if you got caught looking too closely at somebody's face and their possibly poor application of that beeswax, they would tell you to mind your own beeswax. So keep that in mind, something to think about. In the meantime, I'm happy to share my beeswax stories with you, and thanks for following along. Until next time, take care.